Finally, I'm rid of that baggage. Starting today, my parents are moving in with me at my house. As soon as my parents passed away, my husband Mike, having demolished our family home, stood in front of its site and blurted this out to me, standing there in shock. "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? Hurry up and bring the inheritance to our place." At his words, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. So that's what this was all about, I realized. What? Why are you laughing? Don't you guys know? What are you talking about? Mike and my in-laws looked at me quizzically as I laughed. It was then that I told them the truth. My name is Misery Nathaniel. I was born the eldest daughter to ordinary office worker parents. I have one brother. A very normal family. I married Mike when I was 29 and we had 2 kids. Juggling work and parenting, I suddenly found myself at 55. My son Sean and daughter Amelia had grown up to be fine adults. Each were living on their own and struggling with their new careers. Now was the time to relax with my husband. It was an ordinary life, but I was happy. I thought I would continue to age like this. But my mundane life changed one winter day. My father was in a car accident and suddenly passed away. He was only 72 at the time. Our whole family was engulfed in grief. Especially my mother, who was so depressed she couldn't even eat. "Mom, I know it's hard, but you have to eat." I told her this time and time again. "I know, but I just don't have the appetite. It feels like there's something stuck in my chest." My brother and I thought she was just emotionally distressed and watched her for a while. However, she rapidly lost weight in just half a month. Worried, I took her to the hospital. Cancer? The diagnosis from the doctor left me in shock. The cancer was advanced and surgery wasn't an option, with about a year left to live. I hadn't had the chance to really take care of my parents yet. Just when I thought I had lost my father, now my mother too was facing this. I was even more devastated than when my father passed. But I didn't have the luxury of grieving forever. My brother lived far away and couldn't be relied upon. So, it was up to me to take care of my mother. I immediately told Mike that I wanted to live with my mother. I couldn't leave her alone, both emotionally and physically, in her illness. But Mike's reaction was unexpected. "What? We just finished dealing with your dad's funeral and now I have to be dragged into more of your family's issues?" He said with a sigh, obviously annoyed. "You don't have to say it like that. Can't you just drive her to the hospital and back? Do we really have to live with her? I think she might feel lonely. If it's not okay, maybe I can just live at my family home for a while?" I suggested. Then Mike became indignant. "What? And who's gonna take care of my meals while you're gone?" "I'll come and cook, of course." "What about cleaning? Who's gonna do the laundry?" I fell silent. I intended to do what I could, but I couldn't do everything as before. Being confronted with this reality hurt. If someone said I was being selfish for wanting to care for and nurse my mother, I wouldn't be able to argue back. I'm sure my mother, being considerate, would say everything is fine as it is. But I really wanted to do something for my parents. "Fine, but I'm not helping with anything, you hear?" Mike grudgingly said to my silence. His attitude was arrogant, but he had ultimately agreed. "I'm sorry, and thank you." Although I thought he was being awful, he had agreed to my wish. I suppressed my desire to argue back and thanked him. Despite the trouble, Mike and I started living with my mother at my family home. We had originally been living in a house provided by Mike's employer. Mike was an only child. Since Mike's father really wanted us to live together, we didn't plan on buying our own home and were going to eventually move in with Mike's parents. Living in the company housing was more convenient for work, and the rent was only about $600 a month, so it wasn't a big burden. But now that we've moved to my family home, we don't have to pay that anymore and we have more space. I think living together wasn't all disadvantages for Mike. True to his word, Mike didn't help out with anything, but I'm glad I could live with my mother. She seemed energetic, but she often felt weak and spent a lot of time lying down during the day. I prepared her meals, fed her, and managed her medication. It would have been impossible for her to do all that alone. "I'm sorry, Misery. Thank you. It's a big help that you're here with me. I should thank Mike too," my mother said, expressing her gratitude to us many times. She was unaware of the harsh words Mike had said about living together, so she was grateful to him too. One evening after my mother had gone to bed and Mike returned home. While serving dinner, I brought up the subject of my mother's treatment. Mike glared at me and said, "I don't know what you want me to say. I told you I'm not helping with anything," refusing even to listen. I needed someone to vent to, someone to consult. All I wanted was for Mike to listen. Even after 1 month, 2 months, Mike's attitude didn't change. He constantly complained about living together, acting as if he was doing a great favor, and his behavior became increasingly obnoxious day by day. But I couldn't say anything against it. Between worrying about my mother and being considerate of Mike, I was becoming more stressed. Around the time of the 1-year prognosis, my mother's condition worsened rapidly, and she was hospitalized. 3 days later, she passed away. Although I had prepared myself mentally, I was devastated. My brother's family and my children came right away and helped a lot, but in times like this, you really want your spouse by your side. However, Mike was laughing and chatting with his parents in a corner, not helping with the funeral preparations at all. My brother had taken a lead role in preparation, and somehow we got everything ready for the funeral. But Mike, who should have been sitting in the family section, was at the very back of the relatives section. "Mike, I want you to sit in the family section," I said, but he replied, "No, I'm fine here. I'm not a blood relative, after all." "But you're my husband." Then his mother chimed in. "He's your husband, but he's not your mother's son. Mike is our son, so he's an outsider, you know." "Yeah, Mike's parents are just us. Misery should sit in the family section." Hearing this from my in-laws, I was left speechless. From where I come from, it's common for sons-in-law to sit in the family section at funerals, though this might vary by area. Sure enough, with Mike not found in the family section, distant relatives started whispering, wondering if we had divorced. It's one thing for people to gossip, but all of this could have been avoided if Mike had just sat there. Feeling a bit upset that Mike wasn't by my side, we still managed to see my mother off peacefully. After the funeral, my brother's family, my children, Mike, and his parents returned to my family home. "Thank you for coming, especially at such a busy time," I said to my in-laws, offering them some tea. They laughed and replied, "Really, it's something. First your father, now your mother. These funeral expenses are a burden for us too. But at least that's the end of it." I was stunned by their words. What did they mean by that? I couldn't believe they would say such a thing. I forced a smile and excused myself. Then I overheard Mike talking with his parents. "It must have been tough for you, Mike, living with outsiders." "Yeah, dealing with Misery's whims was a pain. A husband shouldn't just follow his wife's demands. If you don't like something, you have every right to refuse." I clenched my fists. Their voices, laughing and chatting, were unbearable, but this wasn't new. Mike's parents had always been insensitive and rude. When Mike and I got married, his mother said, "Couldn't you find someone more attractive? I can't expect much for grandchildren." His father joked, "They say beauty gets boring after 3 days. With Misery, you won't get bored." And Mike just laughed, "It's funny. Such a disrespectful family." I felt something snap inside me. Reflecting back, neither Mike nor his parents had said a single comforting word to me, either at my father's funeral or after my mother's passing. Instead, they ridiculed me. I had felt sorry for imposing on Mike, but now I questioned his behavior as a person. I had been too concerned about Mike while just wanting to do right by my mother. I realized I shouldn't have felt so guilty towards Mike, especially since he wasn't supportive. While I simmered in anger, Mike and his parents continued to laugh and chat in another room. If my brother's family and my kids had heard them, they would have been upset, but fortunately, they were in the kitchen. I was relieved to be the only one who heard Mike and his parents' conversation. Then, I heard more from my mother-in-law. "Misery?" "Yes," I replied, startled. "Can I have this?" my mother-in-law asked, holding my mother's purse. Confused, I stammered, well. Your mother won't be needing it anymore, right?" Mike suggested I take it home. "Maybe I'll just keep it." As she held up the purse, appraising it. I couldn't believe her audacity, especially right after the funeral. I took the purse from her and said firmly, "No, you can't." "What?" Her expression changed. Not so much about the purse being taken away, but more about me, her daughter-in-law, standing up to her. Yet, I stood my ground. We're not ready to sort through my mother's belongings yet. We'll distribute her keepsakes among the family later. My mother-in-law turned red with anger. What do you mean? Are you saying I'm an outsider? You said earlier at the funeral that even Mike was an outsider to my mother. How come Mike is an outsider, but your family? I retorted. Hearing this, Mike and his father also turned red. What are you saying? Apologize to Mom. How disrespectful, a daughter-in-law talking like that. Their commotion drew everyone from the other room. I didn't expect to be called an outsider after all the effort we put into attending the funeral. Let's go home, Dad. My mother-in-law shouted at me in front of everyone and stormed out of our house. For some reason, even Mike was angry and left with his parents. What happened? Did you really call your mother-in-law an outsider? Everyone asked me, having heard only her side. Taken out of context, it might have seemed like I was the one being harsh. But I explained the situation to everyone. Not a single person blamed me. Grandpa and Grandma should be more considerate of other people's feelings. That's just how Dad and Grandma and Grandpa have always been. My children sided with me, but I still couldn't forgive those three. Mike hadn't come home for a while since that day. I hadn't contacted him either. I didn't think I should be the one to apologize, and I wasn't sure if I could forgive him even if he did. But I knew things couldn't stay this way forever. Then one day, Mike came back. Welcome home. I greeted him, suppressing the anger that flared up at the sight of him. Then he said, "It's been tough, huh?" His gruff words were an attempt at showing concern, and I was taken aback. Take the kids and go on a trip. It'll be a good change of scenery for you. And with that, he handed me travel vouchers. I was speechless. Instead, tears started to stream down my face. It might have been the kids' idea. But I was touched that Mike went along with it. I immediately contacted the kids to plan the trip. Really? Dad suggested this? It's surprising, isn't it? The kids were astonished by my proposal. It seemed like it really was a gift for Mike. I wonder if Dad feels bad about what happened. I said, laughing. I gratefully accepted the travel vouchers from Mike. I'll be off then. Yeah, take your time. Stay with the kids at their places too, why not? Really? I can't be away that long. Don't worry about me. I'll relax at my parents'. Just enjoy yourself. With that, Mike sent me off. Amelia was happy to have me visit, so before the spa trip, I stopped by her place and then Sean's. I hadn't been able to visit them while caring for my mother, so I helped out by cooking and freezing meals for them. Mom, you should relax. But thanks, this really helps. They both said, delighted to have my cooking at home. This opportunity was all thanks to Mike's suggestion. And then came the eagerly awaited spa trip. I spent a relaxing time at the hot springs with my children. The weariness from caregiving and the sorrow of losing my parents seemed to have healed quite a bit. I was away for almost a week, but both my kids returned to their homes with bright smiles. That was fun. We should thank Dad for once. True, just this once. But I wonder if he's up to something? Amelia joked. Don't say that. Dad thought about us in his own way. I laughed. When I returned home, planning to share the memories with Mike and start our life anew as a couple. However, when I arrived home, I was speechless. What? The house is... I looked around in disbelief. Despite recognizing the location, the family home that should have been there was gone. Then, out of nowhere, Mike appeared. Followed by his parents. They were grinning at me standing there dumbfounded. Mike! What's going on? I asked. With the same sickening smile, Mike said. Finally, I'm rid of that baggage. Starting today, my parents are moving in with me at my house. What are you talking about? I replied, trying to stay calm. Then he opened his mouth. Have you lost your mind? Your family home has been demolished. Bring the inheritance to our place quickly. Whatever you inherited, it's Mike's now. I realized then. The disappearance of the house was Mike's doing, and it was all for the inheritance. Such betrayal, after thinking about the future on my way home. I was filled with indescribable sadness and anger. But demolishing the house won't make things go Mike's way. I won't let it. I burst into laughter at the sight of their smirking faces. My laughter baffled Mike and his father. What? Why are you laughing? What a weird woman. Has she gone crazy? My mother-in-law looked at me as if I were something eerie. Facing the three of them, I spoke up. Don't you guys know? What are you talking about? I said to him. First off, I haven't inherited a single penny. So, there's no inheritance. After saying that, I burst into laughter again. Perhaps they mistakenly thought they'd become rich from the inheritance. Their wild imaginations and actions had me in uncontrollable laughter. What do you mean? Explain yourself, Mike demanded. But I kept my mouth shut. I felt no need to enlighten them. Before that, I'm not going to live with strangers. If you want to live together, go ahead alone. Ignoring Mike's question and rejecting his initial suggestion made my mother-in-law furious. You helped with your parents' housework, but you can't do ours? You're aware of the circumstances, right? I agreed to live together, didn't I? I told you I didn't want to live together. Have you forgotten that you chose to live together to avoid housework? Mike and his mother bit their lips as I refuted them one after another. Also, demolishing the family home like that. There are things you just shouldn't do. I yelled at them. And then left the scene. Behind me, Mike's voice called out, "Where are you going?" But I didn't look back. Right now, I needed to find a place to sleep for the night, and I really didn't want to see Mike's face. I immediately consulted a lawyer. Demolishing a house couldn't be that easy. The house is still in my mother's name. As I wondered which company had done it, an unbelievable truth came to light. Mike and his father had demolished it themselves. His father, who worked in demolition, enlisted the help of acquaintances and even rented heavy machinery. The planning was meticulous. Moreover, they even gave me travel vouchers to get rid of me. Tears welled up in my eyes at the realization of being deceived, and the frustration was unbearable. Is there any way to punish all three of them? As I tearfully explained my situation, the lawyer smiled at me kindly. Mike unlawfully demolished the house in your mother's name. He can be charged with property destruction and held liable for damages. Let's start by demanding a formal apology from Mike and his parents. I nodded in agreement. The lawyer quickly proceeded with the necessary actions. A few days later, Mike called me, furious about the legal notice he received. What's with this certified letter? Oh, you got it? You destroyed my precious house. Of course, you have to compensate. Compensate? We said we were moving to my parents' place. I demolished a house that nobody was going to live in. You should be thanking me, not asking for compensation. Now bring the inheritance and come back home. He said arrogantly. Thank me for demolishing my house? Don't make me laugh. And what inheritance? It's not even been settled yet. I shouted back over the phone. Mike was silent, seemingly taken aback by my anger, which I rarely displayed. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was exactly this. I had a whole year with my mother. It was obvious that we would discuss matters of inheritance. So, I told my brother. I don't want anything. Give it all to you. As a result, he inherited all the cash and stocks. He insisted that I should have the house, as he lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I wasn't going to live there, it could even be rented out. That was the plan, for me to inherit the house. Anyway, either you and your father restore the house to its original state, or pay the amount specified in the letter. That amount of money. I was considering settling this amicably. Well, fine. If you can't pay, I'll file a police report and sue you, I declared. I'm sorry, I didn't think you'd get so angry. Of course I'm angry, what do you expect? He began to make excuses. He seemed to think that if my family home was gone, he wouldn't have to live with his parents. Especially, Mike's father had always desired to live together. Mike's father seemed to have a fondness for Sean and apparently wanted to live with him. Mike had refused to live together before, citing difficult commutes, but his parents thought I was the one against it. So, he convinced them by demolishing my house and making it seem like I'd move in with them with the inheritance. But I couldn't forgive him after hearing such a thing. Please, give me a break. I didn't mean any harm. Dad's sorry too. If he's truly sorry, then agree to the settlement. I said and hung up the phone. Mike kept calling and sending messages, apologizing. If you're sorry, just transfer the money. I pushed him away. I knew my childhood home couldn't be restored, but this was the only way I could process my unbearable feelings. Afterward, I stayed at Amelia's place. This situation was known to my brother's family and my children. Although my brother must have been angry about our house being demolished without his consent, he said, "I won't interfere, but I'll help in any way I can." Do what you think is best, misery. Everyone condemned Mike's actions and supported me. A month passed without any compensation or alimony payment from Mike. During that time, there was no contact from him. I couldn't stay with Amelia forever. I wanted to get the money as soon as possible to at least establish a living foundation. Contrary to my wishes, something unbelievable happened. It was revealed by Amelia. "This apron looks a lot like Grandma's," she said, showing me her smartphone screen. I was surprised when I saw it. It was a listing on a flea market app. The apron Amelia mentioned, similar to my mother's, was a unique one I had made for her. "What? This is Grandma's apron. I made it, so I'm sure." "What?" Amelia quickly checked other listings. The seller seemed to have recently joined the app, with no transactions or reviews yet. There were nearly 30 items listed, and to my horror, all of them belonged to my mother. I immediately realized. It was Mike. He was the only one who could have taken my mother's belongings after demolishing the house. I called Mike right away. "What's this about the app?" "App?" Mike responded, sounding annoyed. Furious, I thought Mike was pretending not to know. "Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's things without permission, aren't you? Cancel those listings right now." Mike, sounding panicked, replied. "What? No, it wasn't me. Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over right now to get everything back," I said and hung up, then immediately headed to Mike's parents' house with Amelia. "Where are Mom's things?" I demanded as soon as we arrived and called out for Mike. Confronting Mike at the door, he stuttered. I don't know anything about it. Tell the truth, Dad." Amelia joined me in pressuring Mike. He seemed flustered. Mike's parents, noticing our presence, came out. "Oh, Amelia, you're here?" Mike's mom greeted, smiling at the sight of her granddaughter. Angry, Amelia said, "Grandma, tell Dad to tell the truth." "The truth?" "Grandma's belongings that passed away recently, Dad seems to be selling them." At Amelia's words, Mike's mom burst into laughter. Mike, with a troubled look, kept repeating, "It really wasn't me." Then, his mother loudly exclaimed, "Mike is selling them? That's impossible." "But, because I am the one selling them." I felt my blood run cold. Mike probably knew about it. With a look that almost said this is bad, he turned to look at his mother. Despite Amelia's shock, his mother cheerfully continued. "What? It's a lot of work, you know? I have to pack everything carefully and make sure the photos look good." She seemed oblivious to the fact that she was selling stolen goods, chatting happily about the app. I struggled to restrain myself from lunging at her. "Cancel the listings. Those aren't yours to sell." Amelia, red with anger and tears in her eyes, pleaded with her grandmother. However, Mike's mother seemed displeased. "What's the big deal? I finally found a hobby I enjoy. I use the things I can and sell the rest for a little pocket money. It's good for preventing dementia. I'm the only grandma left, so Amelia wants me to stay healthy and live long, right?" she said nonchalantly. Pleading with her to stop had no effect, there was no sign of remorse. But if talking won't help, then action is the only option. "Amelia, let's go." "But..." "It's okay, let's go." I pulled Amelia out of the house and headed straight to the police station. I wasn't planning to file a report for the demolition of the house, but theft is a different story. When I explained to the police that my mother's belongings were being stolen and sold, they acted immediately, and Mike's mother's account on the flea market app was suspended. The items wouldn't be sold anymore. I called Mike on the way back from the station. "I had your mother's account stopped." "You knew about it, right?" "You're complicit." "No, I've filed a police report about this. Please cooperate with the investigation." Mike became frantic.
What? We're family, right? Withdraw it, please.
Family? You still haven't paid any compensation for the house nor alimony, and there's no sign of remorse. Faced with my shouting, Mike was taken aback. But I'm not heartless. Despite everything, I have feelings for Mike, having lived with him for so long. Sighing, I said, I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Return everything. And Mike, your father looked quite unwell. Has he seen a doctor? What? I'm not a monster, so just passing on that message. I said and hung up. Mike's father, whom I had just seen, was alarmingly thin and hadn't spoken much. His complexion was more than just pale. It was unnaturally dark. His ill health was obvious. But that family probably hadn't noticed. His wife, nonchalantly selling stolen items, and Mike, who only acted tough with me. They lacked any real concern for others. The next day, I received a call from Mike's father. Expecting it to be a thank you call, I was met with the complete opposite. What do you mean by treating me like a sick person? Planning to dump me in a hospital to get rid of the hassle? I need to protect Mike and my wife from you. I'm not going to any hospital, he scolded. It was shocking to be reprimanded when I was just concerned. Sorry for overstepping. I was just worried. Humph. I'm not frail or short-lived like your parents. Don't make a fool of me. I was infuriated by his words, but a few days later, he apparently felt unwell enough to visit the hospital. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Mike called me in a panic. Dad's got terminal cancer. What am I going to do? But I just snorted. I don't know. What did you say when I suggested going to the hospital? He said, I'm not frail or short-lived like your parents. So, deal with it yourself. How can you be so heartless? Misery, I never thought you'd be such a person. Who's heartless? Did you ever say a single warm word when my mother was sick? Reflect on your own actions. I said and hung up. As expected, Mike's father passed away soon after. As a human being, I didn't want to harbor negative feelings towards the deceased, but recalling everything that had been done and said, I couldn't shed a tear. After his funeral, his will was found. Despite all his talk of not being short-lived, he had made thorough preparations. The house goes to the grandson, Sean. The rest of the estate is to be divided between my wife and eldest son. I was surprised to see Sean's name. Mike's father had always favored him, wanting to live with him. He must have wanted Sean to have the house even after his death. It was a nuisance for Sean. Renounce the inheritance. You don't need that house, do you? I told Sean, but he was happy to receive it. Inheriting the house was more of a burden than a benefit due to inheritance tax. But if he was pleased, I had no right to say anything. Following the will, Sean inherited the house. His grandmother was happy and paid the inheritance tax. He's our successor, after all, she said. Well, that's not wrong. While I felt a bit sad as if Sean had been taken from me, something unbelievable happened next.
Come over to our house.
Mike's call prompted me to head straight to his parents' house. Then, I saw Mike's mother and Mike himself standing in front of their house, stunned, just like I once had been. The site was filled with heavy machinery, trucks labeled with demolition company names, and workers. Their house was being torn down right before our eyes. What's going on? It's my house. I can do what I want with it. Sean said, appearing from somewhere, looking satisfied as he watched the demolition.
Sean! What are you doing? Stop this right now.
Stopping it now won't make it livable anyway.
Sean, what have you done?
Mike's mother and Mike were begging Sean. But Sean just laughed. Did you forget what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom? Sean. Grandma, you were awful to Mom too, right? Did you apologize? Sean's smile turned into a sharp glare at Mike's mother and Mike. They fell to their knees. The heavy machinery continued to noisily dismantle their house. I finally felt relieved seeing this scene. Later, Mike finally paid the damages and compensation from the inherited assets. The stolen items that Mike's mother took from my mother were retrieved by Sean and safely returned to me. You always have me and Amelia, Sean said, and I finally shed tears of relief. Mike's mother and Mike, having lost their house and left with no money, were now living in a company house again. Mike and I had moved out of the company house. But now Mike and his mother had to return, becoming the subject of rumors. I explained the whole truth to Mike's colleague's wife, who we were on good terms with. Mike and his mother will likely have a hard life in the company housing, but it's their own doing. Additionally, after Mike's retirement, they'll be forced to save up for a new place to live. I sometimes think about asking my friends how Mike and his mother are living now, just to have something to talk about. After that, I continued to stay at Amelia's house, but then Sean got engaged to be married. He was planning to build a house. The land of the former family home sold for a decent amount, and I was glad to see that even that house served a purpose.
Mom, come live with us.
Sean offered. His fiancée welcomed me warmly. Since I couldn't keep relying on Amelia, who lived alone, indefinitely, I decided to take up on Sean's offer.
I am thinking of living happily with my new family, determined not to become a mother-in-law like my own mother-in-law.